Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Ryan, and I am the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. I'm so excited to welcome you all here, and I appreciate you coming out in this weather. This room is filled with students, faculty, staff, community members, and friends. And we're so excited that you're here for our annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. You all should have a program, and I just want to kind of introduce what we'll be doing today. So you'll hear from a group of Vermont Law and Graduate School students, faculty, and staff who are going to lead us in some musical selections. Following my speaking here, they will get up and talk and sing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I'll ask you all to please stand while they do that. And then you're going to hear some opening remarks from our president, Rod Smola, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker. So again, thank you for being here. We're excited. This is an important event, an important day. And at this time, I invite the Vermont Law and Graduate School faculty, staff, and students to get up and lead us. And please stand.
All four of us. Yes, over here, please.
Shadowed beneath the Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today would have been, or this week would have been, Martin Luther King Jr.'s 95th birthday. So reflecting back on that birthday, he was not born named Martin Luther King Jr., and his father was not born named Martin Luther King Sr. His father was pastor of the famous Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. His son would later also be pastor of that church. In 1934, Michael King traveled to Germany. He had named his son, Michael Jr. King, who we now think of as Martin, Michael. He traveled to Germany, and he happened to visit one of the most famous spots in the history of Christianity, the Wittenberg Castle Church. The Wittenberg Castle Church is where a dissenting Catholic priest, Martin Luther, nailed to the door his 95 Theses, a document that set forth his grievances against the perceived corruption of the church. And that ignited what became the Protestant Reformation, the Lutheran denomination, and by extension many other Protestant denominations, including the Baptists in the United States, which of course Michael King was a pastor. He was a Baptist preacher. He was so moved by that he changed his name from Michael to Martin Luther, Martin Luther King Sr., and he changed his own child's name to Martin Luther King Jr. Well, why would that matter? To me, there was a kind of prescience in that gesture, because much like Martin Luther changed the world with his 95 Theses, Martin Luther King Jr. would come to change the world not only as a magnificent activist and orator, but as a theologian and a philosopher, and arguably the greatest literary work in American history, setting forth the rationale for activism and justice and civil disobedience, is the famous letter from a Birmingham jail that he wrote while in jail in Birmingham for leading his civil rights efforts. You also may not know, I take great solace in this, that the magnificent public speaker that we know from the many, many times you have listened to what may be the greatest speech in American history, the I Have a Dream speech on the Washington Mall, and other speeches that you have either seen on television or listened to. I take solace in learning that it turns out that Martin Luther King Jr. was not a natural public speaker. He came to it slowly. In fact, all of his philosophy he came to slowly. I like that because I grew up terrified to speak in public, and as a young lawyer, absolutely terrified to speak in court. I had to force myself through dint of will to do it again and again and again until I became more comfortable doing it. It turns out that while in seminary, Martin Luther King Jr. got a C in public speaking. There are lots of sources of the evolution of him as a thinker, as a leader, as a speaker. One very recent one that I highly recommend to you is a movie currently streaming. I can't remember where. It might be Netflix, called Rustin. If you watch the Golden Globe Awards, it was nominated for one of the Golden Globes as the best film of the year. It's a magnificent movie. It tells you about the evolution of Dr. King through one of his advisors, a very controversial figure in the civil rights movement, Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin, a fascinating figure, ostracized because he was gay from the civil rights movement for a long time, was really the person who instructed and taught Dr. King about Mahatma Gandhi and Henry David Thoreau and traditions of civil disobedience. and also urged him to kind of move out of his shell to become the magnificent speaker that we know. There is a moment depicted in the movie. It's really the movie about the March on Washington, maybe the most famous rally in the history of the United States. An extraordinary story as to how the March on Washington was organized by this combination of Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King. But one of the fascinating things about that extraordinary speech, which makes us have goosebumps and cry and be filled every time we listen to it, is that the famous refrain, "I have a dream today," was not part of the original text. It wasn't in the manuscript. And the folklore is that Dr. King's favorite gospel singer, the magnificent Mahalia Jackson, said to him as they were gathering and getting ready and the people were arriving at the mall, "Tell them about your dream, Martin." And somehow he incorporated on the fly that famous refrain that is so famous. Some of you may believe in destiny and fate. Some of you may believe that things happen for a reason. Some of you may not and think nothing happens for a reason. Things just happen. There is a very interesting moment of fate that for those of you that think things happen or don't happen for a reason may give you some cause to believe they happen for a reason. We all know, of course, about the horrible assassination of Dr. King in Memphis at the Lorraine Hotel, but you may or may not know that he narrowly escaped murder earlier in 1958. He was just coming into his own as a young civil rights figure, and he was at a book signing. And he was signing books in New York when a mentally ill person came up to him, asked if he was Martin Luther King. He said yes, and then she stabbed him with a letter opener. He was rushed to a hospital. He recovered, but the doctors say that if he had even sneezed as the knife was entering his body, it would have punctured his aorta. It was that close to killing him. But miraculously, he survived. And I like to think for a reason, because of everything that then happened between then and his ultimate assassination later. Finally, back to Mahalia Jackson. He, Dr. King, loved one beautiful, beautiful American gospel hymn, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." A hymn written by a wonderful African-American composer from my hometown, Chicago, Thomas A. Dorsey, who had the terrible, terrible tragedy of having his beloved wife and child die in childbirth. And overcome by grief at the loss of his wife, at the loss of his child, he composed this beautiful, beautiful hymn. And it became the hymn that Dr. Martin Luther King loved. And in moments of despair, in moments of darkness, he would sometimes call Mahalia Jackson and have her sing him the hymn over the telephone. As it turns out, in Memphis, in that tragic series of days in 1968, Dr. King gave a sermon the day before the assassination. You may have heard that. That's when he talked about getting to the promised land, but I may not get there with you. And then as he and others, including people like Jesse Jackson, were gathered at the hotel and they were planning for the event of that night, Dr. King called one of his friends, one of the other activists in Memphis, Ben Branch, who was organizing that night's service. And he said, "Ben, be sure tonight at the service they sing, 'Precious Lord, Take My Hand.'" He never got to that service. He was gunned down by James Earl Ray. At his funeral, Mahalia Jackson, his famous friend and singer, sang, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." I'll end by sharing with you the first verse of that beautiful, beautiful hymn. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dean Ryan, who will introduce our speaker.
I have the great pleasure of introducing not only a colleague, but a dear friend of mine, Mia Shultz. Mia, a mixed-race Black woman and commissioner for the Vermont State Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is a devoted advocate for truth, healing, and reconciliation in Vermont's diverse communities. Originally from Arizona, Mia's transformative journey led her to Bennington, Vermont in 2016. Recognized as a human rights champion by both the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Education Association, Mia currently serves as president of the Rutland Area NAACP. She also made history as the first Black woman to assume the role of chair for the Bennington Democratic Party. Her leadership extends to engaging in community organizing, empowering individuals from diverse backgrounds, and addressing systemic issues for positive change. Please join me in welcoming Mia Shultz.
That was very validating, because speaking is not although it should be, right? It is not the thing that I cherish the most. And I am too on my journey and evolution. Thank you all for having me today. Thank you, the Vermont Law School and Graduate School, and all the guests here joined here today. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. Thank you, Shirley Jefferson, who just attended our Freedom Fund event yesterday on MLK Day and gave a fabulous keynote speech. Thank you. Congratulations, thank you. And of course, thank you, President Smola, for your words always. I have been listening to you for a while now. I've been to a couple of your events, and every time I'm just inspired. And it feels like you almost read a little bit of my speech. You'll see, you'll see. So it hasn't always been a recognized holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. There's been a process to it. It actually started in 1968, right after his assassination, the fight to implement a national holiday. But then in 1983, President Ronald Reagan finally signed a bill officially marking the third Monday of January to honor Dr. King. But it wasn't done. There were still states that had to recognize that. And in Arizona, where I lived, there was a controversial process that took place. It became actually a battleground at the time. I had no idea that we were in the middle of history. I was a high school student at the time. And despite the fact that there was one governor that signed proclamation to make it happen, and most states either had a proclamation by a governor or a legislative process, Arizona wanted to make it a ballot measure. And there were, of course, all sorts of special interest groups working against it, trying to change the message, trying to tell people that it was going to take money out of their pockets to have a national holiday. The ballot measure failed, and we had a collective group that was organized that included high school students. That was me. I was part of that. It was my very first taste of activism. I mean, let me be clear. I had experienced discrimination, racism. I had been understanding that from a very, very young age that we were different. But it wasn't until I had that taste of activism that I understood that there was like a possibility for change. I remember marching and singing what we're gonna sing later on, "We Shall Overcome." I could say it lit a fire inside of me that remained for a very long time, even when I wanted to ignore it. After the ballot, there was another election that took place, and we succeeded. I would say also there was the Super Bowl played a big part in that. There were actual financial repercussions that were coming. Stevie Wonder was a big part of that activism where we were ready to, the big famous people were ready to boycott Arizona. And so it took money to actually shift change, but that's okay. It shifted change in my heart. And as a result, as a local high school student, I received an award from our local branch of the NAACP. And here I am, standing in front of you, an activist and the president of a local branch of the NAACP. And so, yeah, we can talk about fate. We can talk about divine intervention. We can talk about, I don't know what it was, but I do know it was something. The fact that I'm here, standing here in this prestigious institution where people are trained to enforce laws, to change laws, and to show their activism in the best ways that they can with their degrees. Case in point, President Smola, who fights in the Supreme Court. So I take so much pride in this journey that I have been on, and I know that the journey continues. When I reflect about the legacy of Dr. King, so many things, numerous emotions flood my thoughts. But one of them, or two of them, I'd like to highlight today because there's so many thoughts I have. Like, I can sometimes not even articulate all of the thoughts I have. But two of them today, I reflect on how short Dr. King's life was. He only lived to be 39 years old before he was publicly assassinated. And it's now been 56 years since his death. So we have celebrated him and honored him, unofficially and officially, longer than he was alive. What an extraordinary impact and an enduring legacy. The other thing that I think about with Dr. King is to know that he is one of the most quoted activists of all time. He and alongside Mahatma Gandhi, his words are quoted more than any other activist. Of course, he was a powerful orator. His words were like poetry to the soul. They had an indelible and lasting profoundness that spoke to our collective ideas and values and the spirit of what true society can be through the power of love for one another. So how do we get to a place where a man was literally murdered for believing in liberation and freedom of marginalized people to being one of the most revered and quoted people of all time? How does the legacy of the values get translated in the way that we experience the world today? I know we've made some strides legislatively. We've instituted some protections and some rights. We're actually seeing some of those being pulled back, right? But yet, people like me and all of the people that come to me, we haven't really experienced that change in real life. Not in all of the ways that we should. Economic disparities and access to wealth and employment still exist. Racial profiling still exists. Harsh and disparate sentencing in the criminal justice system, that still exists. Restrictive voting practices and voter suppression still exists. Don't get me started about healthcare and healthcare with Black women, because that is a whole nother speech, quite frankly. Unequal access to quality education and inequitable educational outcomes still exists. And what's really sitting with my heart these days is how Black women in leadership positions, particularly in higher ed, are being singled out.
All right now, come on. Come on now.
Symbolism can be a very powerful catalyst, but it is only a starting point. It's the stepping stone towards the real work that permeates the fabric of our systems, dismantling injustice at its core. Dr. King's dream wasn't merely about a colorblind society. It was a vision of a society that actively eradicates the roots of systemic inequality. And as we commemorate Dr. King, let us internalize that wisdom. That wisdom that says the time is always right to do what is right. The time is now for us to shift from symbols to systems, from rhetoric to real, tangible change. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths, engage in difficult conversations, and advocate for policies that address root causes of inequality. You know, a lot of people ask me for advice on how they can help, what they can do. Individual. Listen, there's no formula for that. There's no formula, there's no checklist. It requires individual intention every single day. It requires every single one of us to shift a culture embedded by hidden and blatant bias, to examine our participation or lack thereof in a society where it is easier to relegate issues to others and not take responsibility of our own, or to simply think we are not contributors and therefore we can possibly not need to be the participants of change. It requires interruption of injustice when it happens, and deep relationship building with one another, especially when ignorance is present. It requires steadfast reflection and education. I want to tell another story. It's a short one. It's about here in Vermont. My high school student, he was in football, and it was the championships over in Rutland, and they were playing against Fairhaven. Everybody was really concentrated on the game. It was a wet and cold day too. And there were two young boys sitting on these bleachers. One of them got off. Now, one was a person of color and one was white. And the white child left the bleachers and pulled down the child of color into the mud and started beating him up. There was physical violence. Nobody was doing anything about it. So I interrupted it. I remember that the people came circling around us, and they were more concerned about what I was doing than the two children who were fighting. And they actually called the police on me. They said, mind your business. This has nothing to do with you. They're just kids. They do these things. The police told me not to worry about it and that they would take care of it and just to continue watching the game. Later, an observer came up to me and said, thank you. She admitted she had seen the whole entire thing and she was scared to say something. She saw what I saw. She saw that I was reprimanded. And so she knew to stay silent because she didn't want whatever consequences I was going to get. This is a prime example of how we fail each other. Now, I don't know if this was racially motivated or not. There was just violence, right? There was injustice. We're led to believe that we must mind our own business in the face of injustice. We learn that when we do something, that we will suffer consequences for doing that. And therefore, we continue to breed a culture of inaction. That culture breeds and permeates through every single decision we make and every single decision we decide not to make. And the thing about culture is that it influences everything, including our laws. It's all connected. And I know a lot of you would say, I would not stand silent when I saw that. I wouldn't do that. But when it's looking at you straight in the face in front of your peers, are you really, really ready to stand up and endure whatever consequences will come for the right reasons? And sometimes that injustice looks subtle, and so you really don't want to get involved, right? Maybe it's a microaggression or a microinequity you witness. Maybe in like a restaurant or a grocery store in your everyday life. Maybe you think that's none of your business. Injustice is always your business. It doesn't need to be a heated conflict, but it always must be met with inquisition. As we embark on a journey in this state of Vermont of truth and reconciliation, we will hear stories, both past and present, that make us feel uncomfortable. But we must not shy away from that discomfort. That discomfort leads to opportunities for change and transformation, and it leads us to a path here to take responsibility for that harm. It gives us the opportunity to move forward for repairing that harm, something that has not been done before. And then it gives us an opportunity to enact measures where accountability is substantial and present at all times. You know, I haven't used too many quotes about Dr. King today because I feel like we get inundated with them each year. He was prolific in that short time. And I know that we all stand on his shoulders today, in particular me. I feel that. I feel the weight. And I know that there's so many other people across the state who are working for racial and social justice. Folks who are marginalized and they embody the values of Dr. King every day. Now, I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself, but I'm tired. I get tired of showing up to see not substantial movement. I get tired of clicking another year on Dr. King Day where nothing has really substantially changed. And I would never purport to understand the hatred and confrontation that Dr. King had. But what strikes me today in particular is this particular excerpt. And it speaks specifically to what President Smola was talking the night before Dr. King was assassinated. He talked about how tired. I'm going to let him speak. I'm going to see if this works. Can you hear it? You hear it? He says he's tired of marching. I don't mind saying to unite that I'm tired of the tension surrounding our days. I don't mind saying to you tonight that I'm tired of living every day under the threat of violence. I have no martyr complex. I want to live as long as anybody in this building, and sometimes I begin to doubt whether or not I'm going to do that. I must confess I am tired. We are tired, but we keep on going. This is aside, but one of my executive members in the team, like, why do we always use the word tirelessly? I'm very tired. But we still keep going. So before I end, I would be remiss not to talk about how to get involved with the work that I, along with so many others, are doing. Membership in the NAACP is not a passive act. It's a pledge to be on the front line of change, so become a member. That's how we continue to serve, as volunteers, by the way. And similarly, our work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission demands more than acknowledgement. It calls for action, empathy, and a commitment to rewrite the narratives that have perpetuated injustice. And there are opportunities for you to be contributory in both of those efforts. We must not embrace the legacy of Dr. King, not as a distant memory, but as a guide for our present and a compass for our future. And as we navigate through life, each of us embarks on a unique journey shaped by the values that we hold dear, the values that Dr. King inspired in all of us. I reflected with you all about my journey to this stage. And so I invite you to contemplate, what does your journey look like? What values guide your steps? Are they symbolic? Or are they ready to guide you with action? Thank you all.
Wow. Those were some of the most beautiful words I think I've ever heard, Mia. Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite up Serena Nelson, who is the president of the Black Law Students Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dean Ryan said, my name is Serena Nelson. I am a third-year law student here at Vermont Law and Graduate School and the president of the Black Law Students Association here on campus. I want to thank you all for coming today, but I truly want to say how honored I am to have been here to witness this speech and experience hearing you up close, up front, and in person, Mia. I'm not sure how many of you know who I am, but I've lived in Vermont for about 10 years, almost 11 years this coming August, and I've seen so much change happen in the state. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it is people like Mia Shultz, people who embody Dr. King's legacy from service to activism to social justice that make this work happen. And I really hope you took her words to heart. It's all of us. We all have to take these steps every day consistently. Thank you. And so on behalf of Vermont Law and Graduate School, I would like to present you President Schultz with these gifts of appreciation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to invite back up our Vermont Law and Graduate School faculty, staff, and students to lead us in our closing musical selection, We Shall Overcome. Please stand.
Hands like we used to do at NAACP. Wash your hands and win. All right? There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Crisscross your hands.
There you go. Now you're locked. It just needs attention.
I want to see y'all sway too.
Are you gonna, should I hold this up? You probably don't even need words.
All right.
Okay.
We gonna lead y'all. Okay.
All right, here. You got the words already.
We shall overcome.
Thank you all. That concludes our program for today. Again, thank you all for being here. For those of you watching online, we appreciate you. Thank you all again. Have a great day and get home safe.